Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Lauren Izo. Coming up in this edition, rocket after rocket after rocket. That's what the weekend felt like for the communities near the Gaza Strip. Police clash with Muslim protesters in Jerusalem as tens of thousands take to Al-Aqsa for Ramadan. And it may be one of the 10 plagues, but locusts really aren't as bad as you think. Now the yellow insects are swarming Israel's south. After months of relative calm, dozens of rockets fired from Gaza into Israel over the weekend, setting off red alert sirens in the communities surrounding the Strip and sending residents running to shelters. While no injuries were reported, the rockets did cause damage in a number of areas. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calling for an end to the violence, while the defense minister is warning Gaza against continuing to escalate the situation. Meanwhile, Palestinians in Gaza held a military exercise on Saturday, recreating battle scenarios on the ground and at sea, marking 20 years since the Mujahideen brigades were established. The drill, called Effective Promise, was meant to demonstrate readiness for future escalations with Israeli forces. Palestinians in Gaza say they are standing in solidarity with Jerusalem as clashes escalate there as well over Ramadan gatherings at Al-Aqsa Mosque in the Old City. But before we get to that, are we in for more tensions with Gaza? Let's get some perspective on this with Miri Eisen, a former IDF senior intelligence officer. Thank you so much for joining me today.
A pleasure.
So we've had months of relative quiet, but wasn't it just a matter of time until another escalation? How significant is this weekend's barrage of rockets?
It is certainly significant. The time itself, for the Gazans especially, they want to be in the news. That's why it was just a question of time. The way they get into the news is through the barrage of rockets. I'll remind us all, Ramadan started a week or so ago. This is into Ramadan. So it does have to do with that month, COVID-19, and it all came together. And of course, with Jerusalem, that I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about.
Right, so I do want to connect this to Jerusalem in just a second. But before we do that, I want to talk about Gantz's comments. He warned over the weekend that if the quiet will not be kept on the Gaza border, the strip will be, quote, severely hit in its economy, security, and from the civilian perspective. What does he mean by that? Is it possible that we're headed to some kind of a bigger conflict, maybe even a war with Gaza?
I want to hope not. It very much depends on what both Hamas, as the de facto ruler in the Gaza Strip, they took over there 13 years ago. They ruled the Gaza Strip. They can control the firing of the rockets into Israel. Israel is not just going to sit and allow Hamas to both define the rules of the game, to fire rockets in whenever they want. What we can do to impact the Gaza Strip is sadly through economic sanctions. That means to, in some way, stop in the point that goes through into the Gaza Strip, in the Kerem Shalom crossing point, to not allow goods in and out. The Gaza Strip has a border with Egypt as well. Egypt does not like it when it is destabilized from the Gaza Strip either. So hopefully through the two pressures, both the Israeli and the Egyptian, the Hamas will stop this rocket firing into Israel.
So we mentioned that they said the rockets were actually in solidarity with what's happening right now in Jerusalem. We're going to go a little bit more in depth into those issues in our next item. But do you think that these two incidents sort of propel each other, or are Gaza and Jerusalem individually isolated incidents?
Israel wants to look at Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip as three separate entities. Certainly, we look at it in security terms as three totally separate arenas. For the Palestinians, certainly for Hamas, they are all the same. It is all part of Palestine in their terms. East Jerusalem is their capital from their point of view. So we may disconnect, but they are going to connect. That means that their response does have to do, in their mind, with what's happening in Jerusalem and in the month of Ramadan. And adding into that, that next Friday is going to be Jerusalem Day, Al-Quds Day, which is an Iranian new kind of Muslim Ramadan anniversary. It's all going to come together. It's going to get worse before it gets better.
And just one more question for you. Over the weekend, Hamas held a military drill both on land and at sea. And it was specifically, of course, to show their preparedness against a future conflict with Israeli forces. Was there anything new that we saw in those military drills? And is there something in particular that Israel should be afraid of in the future?
There wasn't anything new. Every time that they try and go out and show their capabilities, it's not really to show Israel. It's to show the Gazans, the Palestinians, or remind everybody there are upcoming Palestinian elections. Hamas wants to show strength. Strength is for them security, military. That's where they like to show their hand. Into the sea, into the air. I wouldn't be surprised if they would try to do something by land to show their capabilities before the Palestinian elections.
Very interesting. Mary Eisen, thank you so much for your insight.
Pleasure.
The groups responsible for the rocket launches from Gaza say they stand in solidarity with their brothers in Jerusalem. Dozens of Palestinians have been arrested and injured in East Jerusalem over the last few days amid violent protests, causing tensions on the streets of the Holy City, especially between Arabs and Jews. Is this just the beginning? Here's more. These were the scenes at Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem on Friday, the second Friday of Ramadan. Police presence was ramped up in the Holy City as tens of thousands of Muslims gathered to pray, worshippers claiming they were being restricted from the holy site.
في تقصد لمنع المصلين، في تقصد إنه نخلق مشاكل، نخلق أعباء على المصلين، نمنعهم على المسجد الأقصى، خاصة من المحاسيم إلى المشاكل التي يختلقها الاحتلال.
Just hours earlier, the scenes were quite different. Clashes between Palestinians and police escalated. An extreme right-wing Israeli group came out as well, but for a counter-protest, calling to expel the Muslim worshippers from the city.
احنا خايفين اجراءات كورونا، ماخدين لابسين الكمامات وطالعين، ماخدين حذرنا، بس عندنا القدس اهم من كورونا واهم الاجراءات، عشانها بنطلع بنضحي في كل شيء عشان القدس.
Meanwhile, similar sentiments coming from Jewish residents of Jerusalem.
People saying about trying to reduce the violence that's now in Jerusalem. But I want to tell them that if they want to go and fix this violence problem with peace, so they should say that violence could be not only here, also in Sha'ar Shechem and Damascus Gate. We're there every day. Jews are getting beaten there.
A disturbing viral video on Saturday showed a young Jewish Israeli walking his dog in Jerusalem, getting attacked by a mob of Palestinian protesters. A new violent TikTok trend has also seen young Palestinians post videos to the social media platform having to do with the conflict, like this video of a young Orthodox boy being slapped while riding the train. With tensions escalating in Jerusalem and in Gaza, the Prime Minister is calling for calm.
אנחנו שומרים על חופש הפולחן כמו כל שנה לכל התושבים וגם לכל המבקרים בירושלים. אבל אנחנו דורשים כרגע את מילוי החוק, ואני קורא להרגעת הרוחות מכל הצדדים.
Some are saying the rising tensions could be the sign of something coming. According to one Jerusalem resident, it looks like it could be the start of the third intifada. Lauren Izzo, ILTV. Retired Major General David Sur is a former Knesset member, former commander of the Yamam Counterterrorism Unit, and former commander of the Police Central District of Israel. He oversaw the Tel Aviv Jaffa district during his time as police commander. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello.
So we saw clashes just last week in Jaffa, although it seems the situation in Jerusalem perhaps is getting more aggressive than what was happening in Jaffa. But from your experience and perspective, how easy is it to let these things get out of hand? And what is your best advice for those police officers trying to quell the protests right now in Jerusalem?
Well, definitely it's a huge challenge now for the police and other security services, how to reduce and calm the situation, because what we're seeing here is in Jaffa, in Jerusalem, Gaza, everything is connected to a few things. First of all, the time of Ramadan all the time is sensitive. Second, we have the elections coming of the Palestinians, and we know that Hamas is very anxious to step in, and they have a very good chances to win. On the other hand, Abbas definitely wants to maybe to or postpone it or to cancel it. And for him, the reason of being escalated in Jerusalem, and also the fact that they are not allowed to vote in the Palestinian elections, so it's going to be a very good excuse for him. So we're talking about even conflict of interest between Hamas and Palestinian, and we are trapped in a time that violence can serve this cause. So we need to see in tactical views how to reduce the friction points. Al-Aqsa Mosque, the gates coming to the old city, those are issues with the Jerusalem police are very experienced on that, but the time is they have to see that, as you mentioned before in your report about the Jewish extremist Lava doing the riots and on Thursday, this is something which definitely can escalate. And as you mentioned also, the TikTok phenomenon now, and also the website, which is on the other hand, which is also flaming the violence.
So when was the last time we actually saw protests and clashes between Arabs and police on this level? Is this something, while you were the police commander, that you were used to seeing during Ramadan?
Yeah, definitely. When I was the general border commander, and even when I was the chief of police in Tel Aviv, I can tell you that the Ramadan time, all the time were sensitive, especially in Jerusalem. Jaffa is not the same. Jaffa is really something which very rare to see this kind of violence. I'm glad that it's calm now, and I can tell you that Jaffa is in a different motivation, not like the East Jerusalem. If I have to put maybe a similar time is on 2017, when the police decided in the same place of the gates of in Nablus gates, decided to put the magnetometers, and then there was an escalation, and the propaganda saying that we are blocking them from going into the Temple Mount, so and not giving them the freedom for religious. And this is something which can escalate to like we saw the Lonely Wolf incidents, and it's a big challenge how to stop it before.
Well, some have even said that this could be the beginning of what might be, possibly a third intifada. Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, I won't rush to that. I think we still have time to go, but never say never. I mean, we saw the Middle East, and especially in this area, that things can escalate quickly. The fact that there is no casualties, and even we saw the level of violence in Jerusalem are quite bothering, but still, police is keeping it without casualties, either none in Jaffa or Israeli Arabs, and not in Jerusalem. But as we see, some of the places, small streets that innocent people can go, like the one who went with his dog and he was very close to be lynched. So this is something which definitely can happen and immediately can be escalated. So intelligence and a lot of forces and being careful, this is something which will definitely can stop the third intifada.
Well, we're all certainly hoping for some calm sometime soon. David Soor, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As tensions escalate on the home front, a new development overseas. An Iranian tanker was reportedly attacked off the Syrian coast over the weekend. State media quoted an oil ministry member as saying a fire took place on what was believed to be an attack by a drone. But there were no injuries aboard the ship. Syrian media also said the tanker was suspected to have been hit by an Israeli drone. The Israeli military declined to comment on the incident. Over the last few months, several Iranian and Israeli ships have experienced strange, unexplained incidents or attacks, and it is believed by experts to possibly be a new stealth battleground for Tehran and Jerusalem. Israel admittedly failed last week to hit down a Syrian missile on its way to Dimona, the site of Israel's nuclear reactor. Speaking at a press conference over the weekend, Defense Minister Benny Gantz said the attempt to destroy it with a missile defense system was unsuccessful.
צה"ל פעל כנגד נכסים הכרחיים בבניית הפגיעה הפוטנציאלית במדינת ישראל. נורה טיל נ"מ מדגם SA-5 חצה את המרחב והיה ניסיון להראות אותו שלא צלח. אנחנו עדיין מתחקרים את האירוע. ברוב המקרים אנחנו נראים עם תוצאות אחרות. זה סיפור טיפה יותר מורכב, אנחנו כאמור נתחקר אותו ונמשיך קדימה.
And the United States also chimed in on last week's Syria incident, saying the whole thing was just an accident.
I think it reflects actually incompetence in Syrian air defense, where they were responding to Israeli strikes on targets in Syria. They fired their missiles. The missiles went ballistic, literally, and followed a parabolic trajectory into Israel, where they were intercepted. I do not believe it was an intentional attack, but just rather a lack of capability on the part of the Syrian air defenders.
Moving on now. In April 2017, a 27-year-old Muslim man beat his 65-year-old Jewish neighbor, Sarah Halimi, while screaming "God is great" in Arabic and other anti-Semitic slogans before throwing her out of the window of her third-floor apartment to her death. Following the shock, many leaders of the French Jewish community decided to take action. Even more shocking, the highest French Court of Appeals ruled last week that the murderer could not be held criminally accountable for his actions since he took cannabis before he committed the crime. The French Jewish community was appalled and shocked, so were Jews around the world. Now the victim's family wants the case tried right here in Israel. Let's ask criminal defense and extradition lawyer Sharon Nahari, who joins us now. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
So first of all, how can someone not be charged for such a violent crime just because of cannabis? I mean, it's not a hallucinogenic drug. Shouldn't he still be held responsible for his actions?
Yeah, I think in Israel it was not stand. Usually in criminal court, there are a few defenses for the charge. If you have duress or under influence, if you're insanity, if you have automatism or intoxicated, but it's very strange that if you smoke cannabis, it's the first time I hear it. When someone smokes marijuana, he can be acquitted, which means that he doesn't have any mens rea for what he's doing. It is very strange, and I think the Court of Appeal, acquitted him from throwing him from the windows from third floor, which is very strange, while he's shouting Allahu Akbar. This is not usually happen. The court acquitted someone for this defense. This is very hard to improve. From what I understand is that the court, the judge ruled that the psychiatric evaluation saying that the murder was under marijuana before the incident, and he described it as like a delirious episode that he had that made him not really responsible for his action, which is very rare. And however, the judge also said that the killer did it because he made it as an act, as an anti-Semitic act.
Right. And so now the victim's family wants to bring the case here to Israel to try it here in this country. How easy is it to get a criminal extradited from France to Israel, especially after the person was not found guilty for his crimes?
Yes, this is two questions. First of all, for extradition, the treaty between France and Israel is not so simple because Israel extradite French citizen and also Israeli citizen from Israel to France, but French never extradite their citizen. If the murderer has a French passport and is a French citizen, they will not extradite him whatsoever. They can hold him on trial over there, and there he was acquitted. Secondly, if it could happen somehow, which I cannot believe it will, because French is not extraditing their citizen, still we have the problem of double jeopardy. The double jeopardy rules say that if someone have a trial on the same fact, the same basis, and he was acquitted by the court in a different state for the same ground and the same facts, he cannot be held for another trial in a different country, because it's like make him double jeopardy to be in risk twice. That's how they call it. And that is a defense for him. If they will decide to try to extradite him, he can claim for double jeopardy. And it will be very difficult.
Assuming they do try to extradite him and they are successful eventually, and he does wind up coming here to Israel for that trial, how long could it be until he's actually put on trial for his crimes?
Assuming if it will take minimum 1 or 2 years. And the problem is that all the evidence, are at French court. They need to hear the witness from the beginning. And in Israel, this defense for smoking marijuana and make this crime could not hold. He will not be acquitted in Israel, and I'm sure he will not be acquitted in any other modern country. I cannot believe that it happened.
Sure. A really, really fascinating case, definitely. Sharon, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, for sure. Thank you.
Well, a big mazal tov to Israel. For the first time in 10 months, no new COVID-19 daily deaths were reported Thursday, according to the latest health ministry figures. In data released Friday, the death toll remained unchanged from the day before at 6,346. The last date there were no new deaths was June 29th, when morbidity levels remained subdued following the initial coronavirus wave. On Saturday, there were 38 new cases recorded, but officials are relatively confident that we will not be seeing another wave anytime soon. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledged to reduce Israel's carbon footprint by 2050 during Friday's Global Climate Summit hosted virtually by the White House.
I thank President Biden and his team for hosting this important virtual summit. I've known President Biden for some 40 years. I know the strength of his commitment for stronger action on climate. This is a commitment we in Israel fully share. I've pledged to reduce Israel's carbon footprint and to completing a successful transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy by 2050.
And finally, residents of Israel's south may have found themselves swatting insects over the weekend as a plague of locusts swarmed the area. The cloud of yellow insects flew into the areas surrounding Eilat and the Arava, with some even coming from the sea. The yellow color is an indication of their age, as these bugs are mature and skilled flyers. Throughout history, locusts have been symbolic of major devastation. As depicted in legends and ancient texts all over the world, plagues of locusts were said to cause famines, human migrations, and untold destructions, the most famous example being the biblical plague of locusts in the Exodus. Regardless of their legendary reputations and the sheer size and numbers of the current swarm, the locusts pose no danger to humans or animals whatsoever, so go check them out. All right, let's take a look at the weather forecast with our Chana Rifkin.
Good evening. Mostly partly cloudy skies Sunday and Monday, as you can see. Warm lows tonight in the mid to upper teens in Celsius. Then tomorrow, highs expecting to get into the low to mid 20s. Pretty straightforward. Back to the studio now.
Sounds like it's going to be a nice weekend. Thank you, Chana. And now, just before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. Like this little cutie is stuck in something in that pool, and they're trying to get him out. I really hope they succeed. Oh, it is a wild boar in Haifa. They've been seeing a lot of those lately. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.26 shekels to the American dollar and 2.61 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Lauren Izzo. Be well, and thanks for watching.